She woke up every morning with the same question burning in her chest. Am I failing then? The guilt had become so heavy, she could barely breathe under its weight. Every forgotten permission slip, every tired smile, every moment she chose rest over play felt like another nail in the coffin of her motherhood. She was drowning in her own expectations, suffocating under the pressure of being perfect. But on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when exhaustion had pushed her to the breaking point, her 8-year-old daughter looked at her with those knowing eyes and said 7 words that would shatter everything she believed about herself. This is the story of a mother who thought guilt was love, until one sentence taught her the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction. Sarah Mitchell opened her eyes at 5:30 in the morning, not because her alarm had gone off, but because her body no longer knew how to sleep. The guilt had become her clock, her compass, her constant companion. It whispered to her in the dark hours before dawn, cataloging every failure, every moment she had chosen herself over her children, every time she had been too tired to be the mother she believed they deserved. She lay there in the half-light, listening to the silence of the house, feeling the familiar weight pressing down on her chest. 3 years of this. 3 years since her second child was born, and she could not remember the last time she had woken up without this crushing sense of inadequacy. She moved through the morning routine like a ghost operating a body that no longer belonged to her. Make breakfast, pack lunches, find the missing shoe, sign the permission slip she had forgotten about until this very moment. Her daughter Emma, 8 years old, with eyes that seemed to see everything, watched her from across the kitchen table. Sarah could feel that gaze, searching and steady, but she could not meet it. Not today, not when she could barely hold herself together. Her hands trembled as she poured orange juice, and she wondered if Emma noticed. She wondered if her daughter could see the cracks spreading through her. The way Sarah was beginning to crumble from the inside out. The house was never clean enough. The meals were never nutritious enough. She was never patient enough, never present enough, never enough. Sarah had read all the parenting books, followed all the advice, joined all the online groups where other mothers posted pictures of their perfectly organized homes and their smiling children. She scrolled through those images late at night when she should have been sleeping, comparing her chaos to their curated perfection, and the guilt would grow heavier. She knew intellectually that those images were not reality, but knowing did not stop the voice in her head that told her everyone else was managing just fine. Everyone else had figured out how to do this without falling apart. Her husband, Mark, meant well, but he did not understand. How could he? He went to work each day, had lunch with colleagues, came home to a family that was already fed and bathed. He helped, of course. He did the dishes, read bedtime stories, took the kids to the park on Saturdays. But he did not carry the weight of it all in his bones the way Sarah did. He did not lie awake at night, running through mental lists of everything that needed to be done. Everything she had forgotten, everything she was doing wrong. When she tried to explain it to him, he looked at her with concern and said she was being too hard on herself, as if she could simply choose to stop, as if guilt were something she could set down like a heavy bag. The worst part was that she loved them. God, she loved her children with a ferocity that terrified her. Emma, with her careful observations and her questions that cut straight to the heart of things. And Lily, 5 years old, wild and joyful and needing so much. Sarah loved them so much it hurt, and that made the guilt even more unbearable. Because if she loved them this much, why did she sometimes fantasize about running away? Why did she lock herself in the bathroom just to have 5 minutes of silence? Why did she feel such overwhelming relief when they finally went to bed, and then immediately feel guilty for feeling relieved? Sarah had stopped telling people how she really felt. When friends asked how she was doing, she smiled and said she was tired but good. When her mother called, she kept the conversation light and brief. She had learned that honesty made people uncomfortable. They did not want to hear about the mornings she sat in her car in the grocery store parking lot and cried for no reason she could name. They did not want to know about the rage that would flare up out of nowhere, hot and shocking, over something as small as spilled milk or mismatched socks. They wanted her to be fine, so she pretended to be fine. And the pretending was its own kind of exhaustion. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Sarah was unraveling faster than usual. She had forgotten about the school bake sale until that morning, so she had rushed to the store and bought cookies and tried to arrange them on a plate to look homemade. She had been late picking up Lily from preschool because she had been stuck on a work call that ran over. She had snapped at Emma for leaving her backpack in the middle of the hallway, and the look of hurt on her daughter's face had sent another wave of guilt crashing over her. Now, she was standing in the kitchen, staring at the pile of dishes in the sink, feeling like she was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Emma walked into the kitchen quietly, the way she always did when she sensed her mother was on the edge. Sarah could feel her daughter's presence, but could not turn around. She was afraid of what Emma would see in her face. The tears were already starting to blur her vision, and she was so tired of crying, so tired of this endless cycle of trying and failing and feeling guilty for failing. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Just get through this moment. Just get to bedtime. Just survive one more day. Emma's small hand touched her arm, gentle and tentative. Sarah, Mom. Emma's voice was soft, but there was something in it that made Sarah finally turn around. Her daughter was looking up at her with those wise, too old eyes, and Sarah braced herself for the question she could not answer, the need she could not meet. But Emma did not ask for anything. Instead, she said something that would change everything. She said 7 words that cut through all of Sarah's defenses and laid bare the truth she had been hiding from herself. Mom, you don't have to be perfect. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Sarah stared at her 8-year-old daughter, and something inside her cracked open. Not the kind of breaking that destroys, but the kind that lets the light in. Because in that moment, Sarah realized that Emma had been watching her destroy herself, trying to be flawless, trying to meet an impossible standard that existed only in her own mind. Her daughter had seen it all. The exhaustion, the fear, the guilt. And what Emma wanted was not a perfect mother. She just wanted her mother to be okay. Sarah sank down to the floor, her back against the cabinet, and Emma sat down beside her without hesitation. They sat there together in the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, and Sarah began to cry in a way she had not allowed herself to cry in years. Not quiet tears hidden in bathrooms and cars, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere she had locked away. Emma did not try to fix it or make it stop. She just leaned against her mother's side, solid and warm and present. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt something other than guilt. She felt seen. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah looked at her daughter and saw herself reflected back in a way she had never noticed before. Emma was carrying her own small anxieties, her own need to be good and get things right. Sarah realized, with a shock of recognition, that her daughter was learning from her example, learning that love meant suffering, that motherhood meant martyrdom, that being enough meant being perfect. And Sarah knew in that moment that something had to change, not just for her own sake, but for Emma's, for both her daughters. She could not keep drowning and call it devotion. The question stopped her cold, because the answer was obvious. She would tell Emma that she was more than enough, exactly as she was. That her worth was not measured by her productivity or her perfection. That mistakes did not make her a failure. That it was okay to rest, to have needs, to be human. Sarah would tell her daughter all of this without hesitation. But somehow, she had never thought to extend the same compassion to herself. The realization was both painful and liberating. She had been so busy trying to be the perfect mother that she had forgotten how to be a whole person. The days that followed were not easy, but they were different. Sarah began to notice the pattern she had fallen into, the impossible standards she had built like walls around herself. She started small, allowing herself to sit down for 5 minutes in the afternoon with a cup of coffee, without immediately jumping up to clean something, or check on something, or fix something. Those 5 minutes felt revolutionary. They felt like betrayal at first, like she was stealing time from her children, from her responsibilities. But gradually, she began to understand that taking care of herself was not the opposite of taking care of her family. It was part of it. Emma watched her mother with quiet attention during those first weeks. Sarah noticed her daughter observing when she said no to volunteering for yet another school committee, when she asked Mark to handle bedtime one night because she needed to go for a walk alone, when she stopped apologizing for every small imperfection. One evening, Emma asked her why she seemed different, and Sarah sat down with her daughter and tried to explain in words an 8-year-old could understand. She told Emma that she had been trying so hard to be perfect that she had forgotten how to be happy, how to be real. And Emma, with that wisdom that children sometimes carry, simply nodded and said she liked this version of her mother better. Sarah began to recognize the voice in her head that told her she was failing. She had lived with that voice for so long, she had believed it was truth rather than opinion, fact rather than fear. Now she started to question it. When it whispered that she was a bad mother for ordering pizza instead of cooking dinner, she reminded herself that her children did not measure her love by homemade meals. When it screamed at her for losing her temper over the millionth request for a snack 5 minutes before dinner, she acknowledged that she was human and tired and allowed to have limits. The voice did not disappear, but it grew quieter. And in the space it left behind, Sarah began to find something that felt like peace. She started talking to other mothers honestly, and what she discovered shocked her. Every single one of them was struggling. Every single one carried guilt about something, felt inadequate in some way, wondered if they were doing enough, or being enough, or giving enough. The Instagram feeds, Pinterest boards, and the Facebook posts were all lies of omission, showing only the good moments and hiding the chaos underneath. When Sarah started sharing her own struggles, other women began to open up too. They created a small group that met once a week just to talk without pretense, without judgment. Those conversations became a lifeline, a reminder that she was not alone in her exhaustion, not broken for finding motherhood overwhelming. Mark stepped up in ways Sarah had not asked him to before, because she had finally let him see how much she needed help. He took over morning routines 2 days a week so she could sleep an extra hour. He started planning weekend activities with the girls so she could have time to herself. He listened when she talked about the guilt without trying to fix it, without telling her she was wrong to feel what she felt. Their relationship shifted in small but significant ways. Sarah had been so focused on being the perfect mother that she had forgotten they were supposed to be partners. Letting him in, letting him carry some of the weight, felt like learning to breathe again. Sarah also made an appointment with a therapist, something she had resisted for years because she believed asking for help was admitting defeat. The first session was hard. She cried through most of it, releasing years of accumulated pressure and pain. But the therapist did not tell her to try harder, or be more grateful, or think positive thoughts. Instead, she helped Sarah understand that what she was experiencing had a name: maternal burnout. It was not a personal failing or a character flaw. It was a real psychological state brought on by chronic stress, unrealistic expectations, and the cultural myth that mothers should be able to do it all without breaking. Knowing it had a name made it feel less like drowning and more like something she could address. She learned about the concept of good enough parenting, the idea that children do not need perfection to thrive. They need presence, consistency, love, and boundaries. They need to see their parents as real people with real limitations, because that is what teaches them to be human themselves. Sarah thought about what she wanted her daughters to learn from watching her. Did she want them to believe that their worth was measured by how much they sacrificed? Did she want them to grow up thinking they had to be perfect to deserve love? The answer was a resounding no. And if she would not want that for them, why was she accepting it for herself? The changes were gradual, but they accumulated. Sarah started going to bed at a reasonable hour instead of staying up late trying to finish everything on her endless to-do list. She let the house be messy sometimes. She said no to commitments that drained her without guilt-tripping herself about it afterward. She made time for things that fed her soul, small things like reading a book or calling a friend or taking a long bath. None of it was dramatic or revolutionary on its own, but together, these small acts of self-preservation began to rebuild something inside her that had been crumbling for years. She began to feel like herself again, like a person rather than just a function. There were still hard days, days when the guilt crept back in and wrapped around her like fog. Days when she snapped at her children and then spiraled into self-recrimination. Days when she looked around at the chaos of her life and wondered if she would ever get it right. But those days were no longer every day, and when they came, she had tools now to work through them. She had people to talk to, strategies to employ, and most importantly, she had self-compassion. She was learning to treat herself with the same kindness she would offer a friend. To acknowledge her, Emma continued to be Sarah's unexpected teacher. Her daughter had a way of cutting through complexity with simple observations. One day, when Sarah was spiraling about forgetting to send in money for the book fair, Emma looked at her and said it was just money for books, not the end of the world. Another time, when Sarah was stressing about the house being a mess before guests arrived, Emma asked why it mattered if their friends saw that real people live there. These small moments of perspective from her 8-year-old became anchors, reminders that the things Sarah was torturing herself over were often not as important as she made them in her mind. Sarah also began to understand the difference between sacrifice and martyrdom. Sacrifice was giving up something you valued for someone you loved, and it could be beautiful and meaningful. Martyrdom was destroying yourself and then resenting the people you destroyed yourself for. She had been engaging in martyrdom, believing it was love, but all it had created was bitterness and exhaustion. Real love, she was learning, required her to maintain enough of herself to actually be present. Burned-out mothers could not fully love because they had nothing left to give. By taking care of herself, by setting boundaries, by allowing herself to be imperfect and human, she was actually becoming a better mother, not a worse one. 6 months after that Tuesday afternoon, when Emma had spoken 7 words that changed everything, Sarah looked at her life and saw transformation. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but something more sustainable and real. She still had moments of overwhelm. The demands of motherhood had not diminished, but her relationship to those demands had shifted. She no longer believed that struggling meant failing. She no longer equated her worth with her productivity. She had learned to ask for help, to rest without guilt, to be good enough instead of perfect. And in doing so, she had given her daughters something more valuable than a spotless house or homemade meals. She had shown them that their mother was a whole person, worthy of care and compassion, including her own.